Okay, good morning. The Department of Toxic Substances Control would like to welcome you to this morning's Hazardous Waste Management Performance webinar. We'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your morning to join us. We're going to have quite a bit of information, so what I'm going to do is go through some housekeeping information first before I hand it off to Ryan. First of all is our language and captions. You're able to listen to this meeting in English or Spanish. Just go ahead and go down to the bottom of your screen. You'll find an interpretation icon. Go ahead and click on that. It's got a little globe on it, and you'll find English or Spanish. Choose your selected language. And obviously, if you have Spanish, you'll hear the interpreter speaking on the other end. If you're on your phone, however, it's going to be a little bit different. You're going to want to go over to the bottom of your screen and find the three dots that says More. Click on that and you'll find language interpretation as an option. Once you click there, you'll have an opportunity to listen in Spanish as well. So please be aware that both options are open. Next slide, please. Now, please keep in mind that this meeting will be recorded, as will all our webinars. So if you miss something, feel free to go to our website and you will find previous webinars there. It's a lot of information, so please feel free. Also, for this webinar, it'd be helpful if you use Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. Other browsers don't seem to cooperate as well sometimes. And our questions are going to be submitted through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please, we also have an evaluation that we'll be sending out. So please make sure to fill that out at the end of the session so we have a better idea as to how we can improve things as we go into other webinars. And then also, of course, please be aware that your camera and microphone features will be disabled. However, we still will be answering questions and answers as you see at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. Now, up here we have links for further information. Again, this meeting being recorded as previous ones have been, and you can find them at our Hazardous Waste Management Plan website. That is at dtsc.ca.gov/hazardous Hazardous Waste Management Plan. Of course, you can join our e-list for updates, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email us as well. Felice will go ahead and drop a link to that website in the chat there. Thank you, Felice. And next slide, please. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Ryan Dominguez. He is our supervising hazardous waste engineer, and he's going to go ahead and go through our tentative workshop schedule and kick this off.
Thank you, Alejandro. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for those that have attended, and welcome for those who have, if this is their first time joining. Thanks again for attending our workshop series. This is our fourth workshop of the series. It was developed to provide an ongoing public education and encourage continued collaboration during the development of the Hazardous Waste Management Plan. These workshops will discuss focused topics and topic areas that are based on public feedback that we've received over the last 2 years. And they will also provide additional information related to the development of the Hazardous Waste Management Plan. We completed our first 2 workshops in August and have been working through this month for more. The first workshop covered the data sources that we've used and are using, and how some of those sources may be used or may not be. The second covered potential changes to waste codes that we're currently considering. And the third workshop covered what a future pollution prevention type program might include. Up on the screen, we have our tentative workshop dates. The 25th is next week. That's coming up. That one is up next on a perspective on hazardous waste generation, where we're teaming up with a group from Brownfields. If you see the date ranges there, we're still working to firm up the dates. They're not 3-day workshops. Some of these take coordination with other groups, and so we have to work to nail down dates that will work for everybody. Each workshop will be recorded. If you miss any or want to view the presentations again, please visit our workshop page. We now have workshops 1 and 3 uploaded, and we're working on getting number 2 uploaded to the website as well. And this workshop today is also being recorded. Next slide, please. So here we'd like to do a quick poll. Let's go ahead and load that up. Okay, so question number 1, have you read our 2023 Hazardous Waste Management Report? Number 2 is, have you attended any of our previous workshops? And number 3, what areas within capacity are you most interested in? Okay, thank you, everybody. Right, so for the first question, have you read our report? It looks like it's about 50-50. Exactly. That's nice. This helps us get a sense of the knowledge level and familiarity with our report and other information for everybody that's attending today. And have you attended workshops? About 60-40. And then, wow, it's pretty evenly split within the interest areas for capacity. So source reduction through technology innovations, had about 11 folks. Waste reduction through on-site recycling and treatment, had about 12. Commercial hazardous waste recycling and treatment facilities had about 14. And then commercial hazardous waste landfill facilities had 10. So thank you for responding to that quick survey. And we'll go ahead and close that out. So for those that haven't attended or are new or just aren't familiar with our report or what we're working on right now, in 2021, Senate Bill 158 was approved, and it made changes to Health and Safety Code 25135. The changes require the department to complete hazardous waste management reports that feed information into hazardous waste management plans. In 2023, DTSC published the first hazardous waste management report, and DTSC is using that information in the report to draft the first hazardous waste management plan by March of 2025. The draft plan will be presented to the Board of Environmental Safety for approval. Then the cycle starts again. It's an iterative process. We're using the information from the reports and the feedback that we received over the last few years to develop this plan and future plans. The plan itself will include goals and specific recommendations, and will be organized in the 4 focus areas that we had identified in the report itself and have been talking about throughout our workshops. Next slide, please. As a reminder, you can access our 2023 full report on our webpage. There's a QR code here, and data from this and information from this and the comments we've been receiving is being used to inform the development of the plan. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we've identified 4 areas of focus for hazardous waste management planning. Today's workshop is part of our capacity planning focus area, and we will discuss the supply and demand of hazardous waste capacity. Next slide, please. So the ability to safely manage hazardous waste depends on access to the types of facilities that are needed and their collective capacity. Without adequate access to capacity, California's residents and businesses won't have a means to ensure that hazardous wastes are managed appropriately so that those wastes do not harm human health or the environment. Management capacity comes in many forms. These can be broken down into some subcategories. The capacity to recycle hazardous waste, the capacity to treat hazardous waste, and the capacity to dispose of hazardous waste. These subcategories may sound familiar to those that are already familiar with our report and the hazardous waste management hierarchy. Another term that can be applied to capacity is throughput. Throughput capacity is how much of something can be put through a system over a given period of time. An example is how much waste can be treated at a facility in any kind of treatment process over a year. This also impacts how much waste can be recovered through a recycling process. Now, as we discussed in our report, California is working to build and foster a circular economy. One challenge facing the move towards a circular economy is a lack of facilities that provide the capacity to adequately and safely manage hazardous waste that may be recycled. California will need new recycling facilities to transition to a circular economy, and this is especially important with growing waste streams like lithium-ion batteries. Now, today we will discuss the supply and demand of hazardous waste capacity in California. There's a number of opportunities that we recommend be explored to ensure that the state continues to have capacity to safely manage waste and move towards a more circular economy. So some of these opportunities, one is to foster more source reduction, to reduce hazardous waste before it becomes a waste, or more on-site treatment so waste is not required to be shipped off-site for management. Another one is to improve data fidelity, and we're working to better incorporate on-site management data to get a better understanding of on-site hazardous waste treatment and recycling. There's also room to analyze and explore ways to incentivize additional facilities to help foster more recycling locations to promote a circular economy. This analysis will include evaluation of exclusions and exemptions, as well as current laws that may be out of date. And finally, to help reduce the impacts and harm of mismanagement of hazardous waste, we must monitor generation trends and ensure California's generators have the appropriate access to safe management methods. With that, we can go to the next slide, and I will turn it over to Shawn.
Thank you, Ryan. So we'll be able to get started today. This is, and I want to say thank you for attending. This is in our capacity planning areas, keeping up with supply and demand. This is our third workshop within the focus area of capacity. My name is Shawn Browning, and I'm the senior engineer with the team. Go ahead, next slide. So as we mentioned today, we'll be having a discussion on California's hazardous waste generation and its demand for hazardous waste management capacity within the state and nationwide, as well as how California's generators of hazardous waste create the requirement to understand the supply of that management capacity and its effects on the state's goal for a more circular economy. As a reminder, hazardous waste capacity, like Ryan spoke on, is hazardous waste recycling, treatment, and disposal capacity. And finally, we'll have a brief appraisal on what can happen when generation and management capacity becomes imbalanced. After that, we'll open it up to be able to get additional comments from you on today's subject. Next slide. And to get a little more granular in today's agenda, we'll be doing a quick reminder on the hazardous waste management hierarchy. We'll go into the detail on the demand for management capacity, the supply of management capacity, and what can happen when those become imbalanced. Next slide. So when you think of hazardous waste, many people may think of the industrial processes that were built in the rise of the Industrial Revolution. This facility may be performing chemical reactions, running separating processes, selling a product, and getting rid of its hazardous waste. Next slide. This waste may be put into barrels by their staff and stored on site for 90 to 180 days then shipped offsite to be burned or landfilled. Next slide. If the waste is not managed appropriately, you may assume it to be left roadside, buried in small pits, or just abandoned when nobody was looking. Next slide. However, unless you've read our 2023 Hazardous Waste Management Report, you may not know that California's largest manifested hazardous waste stream is soil that failed California's toxicity criteria, mostly due to heavy metals. These heavy metals could be from historic industrial or vehicle emissions, prior contamination, or from naturally occurring metals in soil. Next slide. If you open a few cupboards in your home, you may see some household hazardous waste for helping cleaning those tough spots in the shower, refueling your oil from a car, truck, or SUV, or getting rid of that pest that decided to come into your home last week. Next slide. You may have a few of these as well. Maybe an old electronic device like an old phone that you forgot to turn in on your last upgrade, or you have a small bag of home batteries that you just haven't dropped off yet. Next slide. Also, technologies and products are not stagnant. In California, we see innovation all the time, which can lead to new waste streams or new wastes and new waste streams, like the growth of renewable energy products with solar panels or low carbon EV vehicles. Next slide. Every day or every year, Californians generate hazardous waste. Businesses or the general public can generate hazardous waste in their day-to-day activities. This can be soil from a construction site, science laboratories at your state's university, a local cleanup project, the computer screen you may be using for today's presentation, or pressure-treated wood posts from a home fence. If we as Californians can't reduce the amount of hazardous waste with source reduction activities, those materials will become a waste and they may become a hazardous waste. To manage this hazardous waste legally and reduce harm from mismanagement, this hazardous waste will need to be recycled or treated appropriately by hazardous waste generators, or be shipped to a commercial facility to be safely recycled, treated, or disposed of. This need for access to a safe management location is the demand for hazardous waste management capacity. So when you hear demand for hazardous waste management capacities, this is the generation of hazardous waste. Next slide. Now, for every pound, ton, barrel, screen, or fence post that is generated and creating demand for management capacity, there needs to be at least, if not excess, supply of hazardous waste management capacity. The hazardous waste management capacity or management system, which was built and improved on by the implementation of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, also known as RCRA, was designed to be a national system. After the release of our 2023 report, we did receive comments asking for our planning efforts to restrict or ban shipments of California's hazardous waste out of state. However, the Federal Commerce Clause listed in the U.S. Constitution currently prevents state governments from interfering with or restricting interstate commerce, including hazardous waste. With that said, there is still room for states to work together with other states on the subject of hazardous waste management. If a hazardous waste cannot be reduced at its source or managed by generators, the hazardous waste will need to be recycled, treated, or disposed of at a commercial facility. This recycling or treatment from the hazardous waste generators or commercial facilities is the supply for hazardous waste management. So when you hear the supply of waste management capacity, this is the locations that are managing the state's hazardous waste. Next slide. So to understand the opportunities for our capacity planning, it will be important to understand what hazardous wastes are being generated, what management facilities are currently in place, and what types of facilities may still be needed. Hazardous waste is being generated every day in California. and puts a demand for management capacity or management puts a demand for hazardous waste management on the system. One example we outlined in our report was on non-RCRA contaminated soil. Due to the science and management access, non-RCRA contaminated soil currently has limited recycling or treatment methods. So consequently, we see almost all of this soil being managed at landfills throughout the nation. Next slide. To ensure proper compliance and reduce the impacts from illegal mismanagement of hazardous waste, it is critical that there's at least, if not excess, supply for hazardous waste management capacity versus the state's demand. Alignment of these capacity needs should be an active subject and well understood. Hazardous waste generation is not consistent. California has its own criteria that test what would be defined as a hazardous waste in the state, but those laws do not travel outside of the state's borders. Hazardous waste generation also changes over time. Some hazardous wastes are reoccurring and is generated from industries year over year and get managed accordingly. However, as technologies change, businesses adjust, and new hazardous waste streams are developed, the supply of hazardous waste management will likely need to adjust to help protect human health and the environment. This has been one issue we discussed in our 23 report, was California's hazardous waste facilities have been decreasing since the 1980s, and there have been no new hazardous waste commercial management facilities approved since 1986. Think about the different industries, technologies, or products that have been created in almost 40 years. Any hazardous waste that comes from these changes need to be used facilities that which were cited before the 1990s, or need to be driven on trucks or trains to management capacity outside of the state, where management requirements may not be the same as California's. Next slide. And with that introduction, we can go and talk a little bit about the hazardous waste management hierarchy. Next slide. As a reminder, California's approach for hazardous waste management incorporates the concept of a preferred hierarchy. The basic structure of this hierarchy includes source reduction as California's highest priority, followed by hazardous waste recycling, treatment, and then finally land disposal. To use the most preferred areas of the waste management hierarchy, the hazardous waste management system will have to have excess supply of hazardous waste management capacity and resources in the more preferred areas, like source reduction or recycling. Otherwise, hazardous waste will need to be treated or disposed of at landfills. Next slide. In our August webinar on opportunities to harmonize hazardous waste data and how we can use it, we showed how management capacity can be managed on-site by hazardous waste generators or off-site by hazardous waste commercial facilities. Some examples of on-site management may include solvent distillation, filtration, or pH adjustment to neutralize more acidic or caustic wastes. Some examples of off-site management can include all the ones we just described, but also incineration of inflammable wastes, physical alterations like breaking down universal waste, or disposal in a landfill. Next slide. Also in our 2023 report, we talked about the importance to invest in California's transition to a more circular economy. In a traditional linear economy, products are used and become waste that must be treated or disposed of. In a more circular economy, businesses reincorporate what would be the wastes back into their production processes to become products again. A circular economy is designed, it's constructed and built to minimize the need for more or for both raw materials or those wastes, which is especially important in processes that can produce hazardous waste. As you can understand, at this stage, source reduction is a critical step. When source reduction is not feasible or may not be feasible, hazardous waste recycling is an important aspect for that hazardous waste management. However, unless there's enough recycling capacity, aspects of California's economy will structurally be linear. Next slide. With that brief reminder, we can go into state's demand for hazardous waste management capacity. Next slide. So again, as a reminder, hazardous waste generation is the demand on the management capacity system. If there is not capacity, there will be no legal management methods for hazardous waste management to be done safely. So who are the generators and where are they located? This map was built using hazardous waste manifest data and includes generators that sent a manifest of hazardous waste in the year 2021. As you can see, California's generators are Californians and are generally around our most populated areas. These businesses could be auto repair shops, paint shops, metal plating shops, retail locations like a big box store, academic universities, construction companies, or they can be larger entities like a refinery, large manufacturing processes, a pharmaceutical company, or energy company. Next slide. Generators generally don't want to produce hazardous waste, but hazardous waste can be an output of their processes. However, as we mentioned in the waste management hierarchy, source reduction activities are the most preferred and should be prioritized. So what is source reduction? Source reduction refers to the action that prevents the generation of hazardous waste or the actions that causes a lessening of the properties to make that hazardous waste hazardous. Next slide. To continue and make a distinction, source reduction can include things like operational improvements, production process changes, or product reformulations, which are essentially practices that companies can implement to reduce the generation of hazardous waste. Now, what source reduction is not are actions taken after hazardous waste is already being generated. Actions that just concentrate the constituents to reduce the volume or tonnage of that waste, actions that dilute the hazardous waste, actions that just move the hazardous waste from one medium to another, such as from soil to water, or lastly, source reduction is not the treatment of hazardous waste. Next slide. When hazardous waste cannot be reduced and needs to be managed at a commercial hazardous waste facility, it will likely need to be manifested and tracked cradle to grave. Since the year 2000, we have seen a decreasing trend of hazardous waste generation in California, starting from around 2.5 million tons generated in the year 2000 and 2001 to around 1.9 million tons generated in the year 2019. We did see continuous decrease in generation in the year 2020 and 2021, which was triggered by the global pandemic. However, there are many waste streams incorporated within these millions of tons of hazardous waste being generated and putting a demand for management capacity. So here we can highlight 3 of California's largest. Next slide. Again, here we're providing a similar 21-year chart of California's top hazardous waste streams. Looking at the year 2000 on the left-hand side, starting at the top is contaminated soil. Next down is waste oil, which is a used oil or mixed oil. And then finally is inorganic solid waste. And this, again, is going from the year 2000 to 2001. Contaminated soil and inorganic solid waste are waste streams that can come from cleanup projects, construction projects, or even geothermal renewable energy facilities. Once generated, the vast majority of these hazardous waste streams are currently sent to be disposed of at landfills, either within the state or in other states. This is likely due to the heavy metals that can be found in these waste streams. And metals are difficult to treat, they cannot be destroyed, only moved from one place to another. Now, for used oil, which is again the used oil, mixed oil, are waste streams that can come from things like oil replacement of the cars, as we mentioned earlier, maybe machine oils from a company, or heavy equipment like a farm's tractor. We did see over 90% of these wastes are recycled within California, mostly due to the fact that oils are a complex mixture of compounds that can be purified with techniques like distillation or other treatment methods. To see more information on these waste streams, please take a look at our 2023 report. We go a little more detail. Next slide. California's program is also more stringent and broader in scope than the federal program. In our report, we analyze and discuss the amount of hazardous waste that's being identified due to the federal criteria under RCRA versus California's criteria, which we refer to as non-RCRA hazardous waste. We found just over 80% of California's manifested hazardous waste is only defined as hazardous in California, labeled here as non-RCRA, versus 18% as identified by RCRA. The amount of hazardous waste being generated from these increased standards likely contribute to comments that we have received from interested parties that California should block all out-of-state management of California's hazardous waste. But again, as a reminder, the state cannot interfere, restrict, or ban hazardous waste transportation to other states as is protected by the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Next slide. Using the data from a report, we quantify the state's average annual tonnage of manifested hazardous waste demand on the commercial hazardous waste management system. This currently does not include on-site recycling or treatment by California's generators, only the commercial facilities. Here we're using the naming format similar to US EPA's capacity assessment reports, which US EPA uses to ensure that there's adequate hazardous waste capacity throughout the country. We can use this data to understand how much California's generation will affect the supply of management capacity. As you can see, at the largest is with landfilling, which incorporates 2 of the 3 largest waste streams California produces: contaminated soil and inorganic solid waste. Next we see is the other recovery methods, which it comes from and is mostly under used oil management. Next slide. Now we spoke on California's demand on the system. We could talk a little bit about supply of management capacity for California. Next slide. If hazardous waste is being generated, it will need to be managed appropriately to protect human health and the environment. The 3 methods that we've outlined throughout the presentation is hazardous waste recycling, treatment, and disposal. Under RCRA, recycling is a form of treatment, but we do like to show it as a separate area since the materials after recycling can be reused and thereby reducing the amount of hazardous waste that needs to be treated again or disposed of at a landfill. One example of hazardous waste recycling capacity might be from a generator's on-site distillation column to reduce the amount of solvent waste that will need to be managed at an off-site incinerator. Oh, let me go back. I just messed up my notes. There we go. Next, for treatment, is any process that is designed to change the physical, chemical, or biologic composition of a hazardous waste, or it removes or reduces the harmful properties. We just get kicked off. That removes the harmful properties or characteristics of the hazardous waste. This might include pH adjustment of acidic waste, incineration of flammable waste, or even the controlled detonation or controlled destruction of an explosive. Finally is land disposal. If a hazardous waste cannot be recovered, treated, or recycled, it must be disposed of in an adequately designed land disposal unit. These units have enforceable technical requirements to ensure waste stays within the landfill area, like for air emissions or engineered composite liner systems, leak detection systems, or leachate collection systems that prevent hazardous leachate from leaking into the environment. Next slide. Also, as we discussed in our report, we saw that the number of hazardous waste facilities with an operating hazardous waste management permit has decreased from over 400 facilities in the 1980s compared to less than 100 still in operation. This analysis allowed for the understanding of the number of permitted facilities and not necessarily the amount of capacity per each of the facilities. A potential explanation for a portion of this decline may be a national consolidation and restructuring within hazardous waste management industry. In addition, the ability to create a new facility can be quite costly and take years to complete. Between locating and siting a new location, construction or equipment costs, implementing procedures for new facilities outlined in Tanner, which is Health and Safety Code 25199, and obtaining the required permits, including from our DTSC's permitting team. And if all those steps are approved, only then will they be able to begin operations. There have been new hazardous waste management facilities, including recycling facilities, that have inquired from our team or from DTSC on obtaining new operating permits recently, but have not currently applied or fully cited their locations. DTSC's permitting team has invested in continuous improvement processes to improve the processing time while maintaining enforceable permits, which have been seen. This processing times have for new permit renewals have decreased from 4 years to almost 2 years, but it is unknown how long it would take to process applications from a brand new facility that has yet to be built. As we mentioned earlier, our findings concluded that no RCRA permit applications for a new facility have been received in over 30 years. And the last known RCRA permit application from a new commercial facility was received in 1986. These factors could incentivize companies to pursue operations in other states where it could be cheaper, faster, but the environmental laws may be less protective. Consequently, there may be opportunities in our planning efforts for recommendations to look at analyzing how to decrease these costs, streamline these processes, or to continue to improve processing times of our permits. Next slide. We spoke earlier that recycling and treatment of hazardous waste can be done on-site by generators or off-site by management facilities. On-site management by California's generators generally require permits to allow for businesses to treat or recycle hazardous waste, unless those activities are excluded or exempted. These permits are issued by local agencies or the CUPAs and have reporting requirements to understand the amount of hazardous waste being managed at each of those generators. These are submitted to Cal EPA's California Environmental Reporting System, also known as CERS. And our team is very interested to continue learning more about how generators are currently managing their hazardous waste. Hazardous off-site recycling, treatment, or disposal of manifested hazardous waste is done by commercial management facilities, and when they're in California, require permits from DTSC. Most hazardous waste, when generated, will be tracked on the Universal Manifest, and the data will be tracked on the hazardous waste tracking systems, cradle to grave. If a hazardous waste like universal waste is exempt from these tracking requirements, they may be tracked on separate reporting systems or surveys. Next slide. To get a better understanding on how much hazardous waste is being managed by generators versus hazardous waste management facilities, we started to review the 2021 generators reports that were submitted in the Cal EPA's CERS program, which is again, California Environmental Reporting System. Note, our analysis is not complete and does not include two of the largest counties, Los Angeles County and Orange County. Here we're showing how much hazardous waste is being managed on-site by generators at the top versus off-site in the latter two by commercial facilities. At the top, you see the maximum amount of hazardous waste generators are allowed to treat or recycle at their own facilities per their lower tiered permits. Below that, you see the amount of hazardous waste being manifested to commercial hazardous waste treatment and disposal facilities. I will say for the record, this review of on-site management is very time-consuming and requires our team to pore over thousands of PDF files. And we're hoping to explore opportunities to streamline the data gathering process with Cal EPA in our future planning efforts. Next slide. As another reminder from our report, about half of the overall manifested hazardous waste generated between 2010 and 2021 gets shipped out of state. We see much of this hazardous waste going to states like Utah, Arizona, and Nevada. This is likely due to the cost for hazardous waste management, scheduling of shipments, or because California does not have any of the capacity, like for incineration. Next slide. Also from our analysis, we also saw that the types of waste and the management locations do matter. RCRA hazardous waste is a hazardous waste that is recognized to be hazardous nationally. Consequently, all 50 states recognize a RCRA hazardous waste to be a hazardous waste. However, California's non-RCRA waste does not follow the same system. California's non-RCRA waste is required to be managed as hazardous waste in a few states like California, Nevada, or Oregon, but is not required to be managed as hazardous waste in those other states or many other states. One distinction here, Nevada and Oregon do not have the same criteria or a definition of hazardous waste as California, only that other states' hazardous waste, like for California, must be managed as a hazardous waste due to policies or legal laws that were passed by those states. Next slide. When we speak about the supply of hazardous waste management capacity, we need to speak about two different types of capacity. As Ryan mentioned earlier, first is the throughput capacity of hazardous waste management facilities. Throughput capacity is the maximum amount of material or waste a facility can process in a given year. These can be seen in recycling facilities or treatment facilities like hazardous waste incinerators. Secondly, is disposal capacity. Once a landfill is full, the land unit will need to be closed and monitored. That unit then cannot continue to receive waste unless more landfill capacity is constructed or is already available. Next slide. One part of the report in section 3 we discussed was the capacity of California's 2 hazardous waste landfills. However, we are not the only ones interested or tracking and want to understand hazardous waste landfill capacity. Again, US EPA is required under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, also known as CERCLA, to monitor and report out the national hazardous waste management capacity in their capacity assessment reports. In their 2019 report, they reiterated important details about the complexities of regulating hazardous waste and facilities, as well as the capacity of the landfills and treatment facilities throughout the US. In that report, they cited that California's 2 Subtitle D hazardous waste landfills had just under 10 million tons remaining in the year 2019. This compares to over 1 million tons of management demand produced by Californians, in which about half stays within the state. If these trends continue, then California's current capacity could start becoming limited by the year 2030 to 2039, unless new locations or units are built. Next slide. Now, looking forward, new recycling capacity would likely be needed in California if we want to work towards a more circular economy, especially since there are emerging waste streams being generated with increasing amounts of hazardous waste and has no in-state recycling or treatment capacity. For example, as more electric or low-carbon vehicles are produced and reach end of life, some of the lithium-ion batteries will likely increase as a hazardous waste stream. And California does not have any capacity to recycle these batteries. Most TSDFs currently operating in the state, which include hazardous waste recycling facilities, existed before RCRA was created and had to receive authorization and comply through permitting processes after they were already in operation. The total number of management facilities operating in California has been declining since, and new facilities are currently not being built. If recycling facilities do not exist in California, California will either rely on the facilities in other states, or these hazardous wastes will end up being treated or disposed of rather than recycled. The existence of a more circular economy for California will likely rely on new recycling capacity. Next slide. With that, we can then talk about how what can happen when these imbalances of supply and demand get met. Next slide. The hazardous waste management system, again, can continue to function when the supply of management capacity is available or exceeds the demand for that capacity. However, that balance is not guaranteed, so we'll be able to discuss what happens when that happens. Next slide. One supply and demand imbalance we have been monitoring is with hazardous waste incinerators. The 2020 global pandemic also triggered a series of events that disrupted the hazardous waste management system nationally. In 2021, US EPA sent a memo that they became aware of a backlog at the hazardous waste incinerators, and some of those facilities would no longer be accepting hazardous waste designated for the incineration. This backlog created a national issue with managing hazardous waste streams. Our team has been communicating with US EPA to monitor the situation, and even though there are signs that this may be improving, this backlog has yet to be fully resolved. California currently does not have a hazardous waste incinerator, nor are currently being proposed, and the closest hazardous waste incinerator is in the state of Utah. We have received a number of comments regarding in-state hazardous waste incineration capacity and have found them at odds with each other. Some interested parties want to understand if hazardous waste incinerator technology has improved enough for in-state capacity, while others are very clear they are avidly against incinerators in California. This capacity limitation added to our justification to research incinerable wastes in our source reduction section, and we'll be able to have a workshop in the coming weeks, as well as the need for understanding generators' access to approved management capacity in our planning efforts. Next slide. These imbalances in the hazardous waste management system can have impacts on Californians and their communities. First, it can lead to illegal disposal. Here we're showing 3 different examples of illegal disposal that we found, where in which the top 2 come from Imperial's Ivan system, which is the identifying violations affecting neighborhood system. The top left is an abandoned battery, top right, abandoned used oil containers, but now on the bottom, you can see 2,600 gallons of illegally abandoned hand sanitizer that was dumped in the Lucerne Valley in the September of 2023. During the pandemic, there was a large ramp up of production of hand sanitizer to protect people from the coronavirus. But as their expiration dates passed, the hand sanitizer became an ignitable hazardous waste. As we discussed on our last slide, there was also a limited incineration capacity, and this lack of capacity, in part, could have contributed to these types of illegal mismanagement. However, we do want to say, state that excess supply of capacity will not stop all illegal management issues, but the lack of capacity can contribute to it. Secondly, if a hazardous waste cannot be managed in the more preferred management methods, it will fall down our hierarchy that we spoke on earlier. If hazardous waste cannot be recycled, it will need to be treated or disposed of. Third, finally, there can be impacts to federal funding for new Superfund cleanup projects. As we talked about CERCLA, which is the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, it authorizes the President and the US EPA to respond to releases of hazardous substances in the environment. One of the amendments of CERCLA includes Section 104C9, which requires states to assure the future availability of hazardous waste management capacity before new CERCLA trust fund money can be used for remedial action within a state. The adequate capacity will need to be for the next 20 years and located within the state or outside the state in accordance to interstate or regional agreements. 104C9 is the main driver to why US EPA performs national capacity assessment reports that we spoke on earlier. Next slide. Another potential management and demand imbalance is the rise of the zero or low carbon economy. California is a national leader in zero carbon emitting vehicles with almost 200 million EVs sold to date within the state, and over 100,000 EVs sold in the first quarter of this year alone. This data comes from our Energy Commission. These EV vehicles have lithium-ion battery packs that contain heavy metals and would be a hazardous waste at their final end of life. As this will take place, there is currently no hazardous waste recyclers that can take these battery cells within the state, and there's a limited capacity nationally. Sourcing lithium for these batteries can come from outside of the US, but however, lithium can also be harvested from naturally occurring geothermal brines used for energy production. Hazardous waste streams from these processes are anticipated to rise in the coming years, but recycling and treatment options are unknown at this time. Another hazardous waste stream is the rise of PV modules, also known as solar panels. Not all solar panels may be determined to be a hazardous waste, but some have been determined to be a hazardous waste in the past. New single-family homes are required to have solar panels installed, and large solar farms are on the rise. However, with all of these solar panels being installed, California does not have facilities to recycle these materials within the state. Next slide. One of DTSC's goals for capacity planning is to ensure the generators have opportunities to utilize all aspects of hazardous waste management hierarchy. To provide more resources to promote recycling and build a more circular economy, there may be opportunities to evaluate incentives to drive changes in our current waste management system. One area is to understand how US EPA is promoting additional recycling through the use of recycling exclusions or exemptions. Currently, US EPA has identified 44 exclusions, but California has only adopted 8 of these exclusions into regulations. A fresh evaluation of these 36 exclusions may provide opportunities for new management capacity, but where recycling exclusions and exemptions should be prioritized in that evaluation. Another evaluation would be helpful is around the procedures of new facilities outlined in the Tanner Act, again, Health and Safety Code 25199. These procedures were passed in the 1986 with AB 2948 and lists out what needs to happen if a new facility or expansion of a facility, but if a new facility wants to begin operations. These procedures created a system of public engagement in local communities, but they may need to be outdated. One area we noticed in our research is around planning, particularly for you here today, around hazardous waste management plans. When Tanner was passed, it required counties to create their own hazardous waste management plans. The hazardous waste management plans would then be submitted to DTSC for approval, but only a small number of counties ever submitted these plans unless received approval. In 2021, SB 158, it removed the language for counties to create these plans and now require our team to draft plans every 3 years. However, 158 did not update the procedures for new facilities outlined in Health and Safety Code 25199 and still has process language regarding counties' hazardous waste management plans. This outdated language and other potential requirements provide opportunities for a fresh view of these requirements to ensure that they continue to meet the state's management objective. Next slide. All right, to wrap up for today and to discuss where we see some opportunities to improve California's hazardous waste management capacity and to foster a more circular economy, we believe there may be some goals or recommendations that could focus on waste to foster more source reduction for California's hazardous waste. Also, to improve data fidelity, we would like to incorporate on-site management data into our future analyses to get a better understanding of on-site hazardous waste treatment and recycling, and to get a more complete understanding of California's hazardous waste management capacity. Also, since new management capacity is not opening in California, we believe there may be some room to analyze and explore appropriate incentives to encourage safe management capacity to help foster more recycling locations and to promote California's goals in a circular economy. And finally, to help reduce impacts and harm from mismanagement of hazardous waste, we want to monitor and ensure California's generators have the appropriate access to safe and legal management methods. Next slide. And with that, we'll bring Alejandro back in and be able to receive any comments or additional feedback on today's presentation.
Yes, we do have 4 questions that we have here in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and read those out. That way we also make sure we have a transcript of them. Coming from Christina Graulau, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Did I hear correctly, slides 39 and 40, the data is from researching what was uploaded into SERVs?
I believe so. I'll go back and check my 39 and 40. Yes, particularly slide 40, where we started looking at some of the on-site management reports, but it's not a full view, and it was review of 1 year of 2021. But it's very time-consuming. We had staff looking at that, and that analysis hasn't reached fully incorporating LA County and Orange County.
Okay, also from Christina Graulau, just a comment that local, state, and federal governments were not named / identified as also being HW hazardous waste generators. Federal facilities have on-site treatment and TSDFs. Federal facilities are mostly all LQGs.
Correct. Yes, Christina, thank you for that. Local, state, and federal governments are also generators. That we were listing examples wasn't meant to be exhaustive. So yes, I totally agree.
Also from Christina Graulau, did your team consider using the large quantity generator LQG annual and biannual facility reports, which provides data on amount of waste generated and amount of waste treated on site? If this was considered, why is that data not used?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So in this first report, we went with the direction of let's split it up, and it's a first data grab, see what's here, get a sense of how we can use it and manipulate the data, move it around, so we can better understand it. We organized it by RCRA and non-RCRA and RCRA and non-RCRA for this first round. We've been talking about how we can then split it up further or look into it a bit differently for large quantity generators, small quantity generators, and various other organizations of it. Mm-hmm. And really looking at specific waste streams as well for the different types of generators, so LQGs and SQGs. So that is something that we are looking towards, and I think that speaks exactly to the iterative nature of hazardous waste management reporting and planning. There's a lot of information and a lot of pieces to review and evaluate, and so this isn't we've talked about it before. This isn't a one and done. This is an ongoing effort that's going to take time and lots of evaluation to really address a lot of questions, and questions specific to large quantity generators are going to be different than questions to small quantity generators. And they're not simple subjects. They take a fair amount of time to evaluate.
Yeah, I'll amplify. It also adds to some of the data harmonization that we've been talking about. In our first capacity and our first workshop, we kind of outlined kind of some of our goals of where we are now to where we would like to be, highlighting more ways to be able to quantify source reduction. Ryan spoke on where wastes are being generated. They could also be, are they reoccurring wastes or non-reoccurring wastes? There's a lot of different ways we know where our first report was maybe limited, but was able to achieve the goals within the appropriate timelines. But we do, as Ryan spoke on the iterative nature, see a lot of opportunities to be able to improve on that and add additional detail to really expand our holistic view.
Yeah. One of the challenges, and I think to keep talking about it, is harmonizing the various databases is important, but a lot of these databases were created for other means. And so like SIRS, for example, has a ton of information in it, but currently it's hard to extract out easily.
Particularly for teams that aren't using that data separate or holistically.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so one of the challenges was trying to figure out which pieces of that database we needed to look at, and how to get that information. And then, it's a limited staff. We have seven or eight ish. Yeah, I can't keep track of my own staff here. And so it's bandwidth. Where do we concentrate our efforts, and then where do we go next? So we've been hopeful that SIRS Next Gen project will provide will allow it to be mined easier and more efficiently. And so we've been trying to work with Cali PA on that. So hopefully, Christina, coming up in the future, it hopefully will unlock a few things and be a little less time consuming to get and mine bases like SIRS.
All right. Thank you, Ryan and Shawn. From an anonymous attendee, we have another question. How is it deemed accessible for a state that generates mostly non-RCRA hazardous waste to have no incinerators and only 2 largely full landfills? With very limited allowances for recycling, how can California even be considered to have capacity?
Go ahead. No. And then you can add.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's fine.
So I wanted to start with the comparison with non-RCRA hazardous waste and no incinerators. Largely, the waste that's required to be incinerated is RCRA hazardous, and the capacity assurance plans largely look at RCRA hazardous waste. It's a national capacity that the federal government does, and so they want to ensure capacity for the waste that is identified as hazardous nationally. Now, non-RCRA waste does apply to landfills. Here, the attendee says that there's only 2 largely full landfills, and I don't know that we have any evidence to say that they're largely full. We know how much room they have in them, and it's, I don't know, it depends on how much waste is accepted,
right.
And so you can estimate how much time may be remaining, but it is kind of driven by the facility's decisions.
And there's complexities there with over extrapolating beyond what we see.
Mm-hmm.
We see a certain amount of generation and we see a certain amount of going to those landfills, but predicting the future requires understanding of 100,000 generators and where they're sending their waste on their manifest. So that there's some complexities there. And as Ryan spoke on, it's about 3/4 of the incinerable waste are RCRA versus about 1/4 being non-RCRA. So you have to balance some of those per what types of management methods there are taking place.
And I think, and one of the questions that we've been talking about is, we need to better understand what that non-RCRA piece is that's going to an incinerator. So that's a question that we have internally.
Yeah. And maybe, go ahead.
Oh, were you gonna?
I was just going to say, and maybe to the last part, where how can we state that we have capacity? I would say one of the largest things is that the hazardous waste management industry isn't static. If we have opportunities to be able to improve it, and we see some of our planning efforts as a way to try to foster that improvement and be a catalyst there. But I don't know if you were going to expand more on that.
Yeah, and I was going to go back to one of the previous topics that we were just talking about in SIRS. I think California has a fairly strong recycling piece or capacity. As we see annually, it's treatment and recycling and reported in SIRS.
And particularly when you talk about SIRS, you're talking about on-site by generators.
Right. Yeah. So it's on-site by generators. That's where a lot of the capacity is. There are recyclers and permitted facilities. And so there are there. But there are waste streams that are growing lithium-ion batteries. That is one area that there isn't capacity. So I think you have to kind of break down and look and see where is it happening, what are they doing, what is the waste, and what are they doing with it, and then how is it capacity in specific waste streams.
All right, on to the next question. Again, from an anonymous attendee. I missed this bit, but did the speaker mention about a bill about requiring California generators to ship to management facilities in California only?
I did not speak on that. There are limitations to be able to hinder out-of-state management from laws, I guess, around the Commerce Clause. Thank you. It's like Commerce Act is not true. Commerce Clause listed in the U.S. Constitution. There was a Supreme Court decision in the past. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, in which hazardous waste management is deemed as a commerce, and then protected by the Commerce Clause. So I can't speak on any bills being proposed on that.
Yeah, me either.
From Marty Walters, not a question, but a comment. Thank you for considering changes in the economy, technology, evolution, and ways to meet modern business manufacturing needs. It all starts with understanding what is actually happening in the system, so I strongly support the additional analysis you are proposing. But ultimately, we need to make the Haz Waste program better serve both businesses and communities by making it more understandable through Waste ID and compliance tools.
Sure. And thank you, Marty, for your comments. I know you've attended some of our press workshops as well and been avidly involved in this. So appreciate the comments and being involved in this process. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Marty.
So we have a question that actually came through in the chat. It's from Alejandro Arboleda. Do you have a slide that shows the federal exclusion 44 and what were 8 California exclusions? And if so, what can DTSC, I believe that says TP, be able, so DTSC to be able to incorporate those in the state program?
To address the first part, I don't have a slide on that. But the main parts there is just having a fresh view on it, I think will be really advantageous. There are obviously differences from the California system to the federal system with the US EPA, and having a holistic view to see where we could find opportunities that are both protective but help foster additional resources may be, I think, advantageous. And if there are additional comments on that, we would love to receive them. We've received a number of comments on a variety of different aspects there. So, but again, address the first part, I don't have that list currently available for a slide. Anything then?
No.
Okay.
Okay, and we've got a question from Chuck White regarding new capacity. This includes expanded existing facilities, correct? How can DTSC enforcement be coordinated with permit to allow appropriate expansion of existing facilities?
Hi, Chuck. I know you've been involved in this process as well, so thank you for attending. I think the main thing here is if there are any expansions, they would need to follow the appropriate permitting requirements as well. I know any changes into the operations of existing facilities, commercial facilities would need to adjust their permitting requirements and receive approval through that. Any sort of on-site management of an expansion for new generators to be able to increase their source reduction, or particularly on-site recycling or treatment, that would need to be worked through with their local CUPAs, which also have their own approval processes they need to be managed appropriately there as well. So I think any sort of safe and appropriate management that helps guide towards the more preferred areas that we've been speaking on with source reduction or recycling should be done intentionally and safely, but need to be, again, enforceable to make sure that they're not done improperly.
And I'll tag onto that a little bit. Currently, enforcement and permitting do coordinate quite often, and so that is occurring currently, and they talk about what the issues at various facilities are and potential ways to address them. In addition, one piece that Shawn mentioned was on-site treatment or recycling and source reduction, and that area I think is very interesting, and it's a generator focus. We look at it's upstream. Source reduction is more upstream, looking at those processes that generate hazardous waste in the first place, and if there's reasonable or viable or practical alternatives to try and reduce the amount of waste that is actually generated. And then looking at and coordinating closely with CUPAs. They're really on the front line of hazardous waste generation, and working with them to identify problematic generators or good ones as well. It's really nice to know and observe a generator that is managing the waste that is generated well, and making efforts to reduce it or recycle it when possible. So I think those are avenues that we really want to explore. We did have our source reduction workshop, and it's a focus. And in that workshop, we had talked about how there used to be a group, the pollution prevention group, that had a unit dedicated to source reduction and evaluating source reduction reports. Colloquially, they're known as SB14 reports. And those reports, we reviewed 3 different data sources or information sources to identify the best one that would provide source reduction information, and we targeted those. Those reports were identified as the best source for source reduction information because they're specific to California. They break down. They look at it from RCRA and non-RCRA. They also have the generators talk about what they're doing in terms of source reduction and why they might not have been able to apply source reduction. The issue that we're running into is collecting those reports, and the volume of reports. There's in the thousands. And so it's a matter of, well, how do we obtain them efficiently and then efficiently evaluate the data? And so what we had talked about in the last workshop was how gathering that information will likely need some kind of database. And it will allow us to then organize the data and understand it. But that's only part of the story, because the reports are where a lot of the meat is, and you need people to review those reports and build up that technical understanding of hazardous waste generation in numerous industries. Pharmaceuticals is very different than a refinery or
construction
project. So it's going to take some time to develop that approach, and it's going to take additional resources to have the people to do the analyses and go out and coordinate closely with the generators and the Coupas to really drive that source reduction and treatment on site, recycling at the hazardous waste generation facilities.
Detailed response, but I think that covers parts of it.
Yeah, it's something that it's
a good subject. That's for sure.
Okay, moving on. From Christina Raulau again. There are well-known and long-running issues with the hazardous waste tracking system data on manifests having errors due to conversion factors used by default. This also is an issue known to EPA specifically since RCRA Info website has launched. We have found sometimes the conversion factor is an order of magnitude of difference, particularly with large volumes, i.e. shipped in cubic yards.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is absolutely a known conversation that's happening. I know there's even different conversion factors from RCRA Info, which may be using more like the density of water versus some of the ones that we use in California to be able to try to adjust for that. One being we know for like soil or asbestos, they don't weigh the same. So there's some known kind of scalars that we try to use to adjust for some of those known errors. There are manifest correction methods to be able to help with defining more accurately how much hazardous waste is being shipped. So if you have like a bill, what comes off the scales for like on a dump truck when it reaches its final destination facility, I believe there are ways for those generators to be able to adjust the weights and allow for more accurate representation when it comes to how much hazardous waste is being shipped. So hopefully that covers parts of it. There is some complexities there, and we're happy to talk more about it. Not the experts, but we have dabbled in that subject.
Yeah, and Christina, what appendix is it in the report? Is it Appendix B?
Appendix B, we talk about some of the known errors that particularly come from like typo type errors. One example was particularly in the mid 2010s. There were before the conversion to the electronic manifests. There were weights that we saw that didn't do the right conversion because it didn't read it as maybe a cubic yard or didn't pick up the decimal point. A dump truck often carries around 23 tons of material, but if it said 23.22, sometimes we would see that as 2,322 tons of. So we did do some kind of statistical data adjustments. So Appendix B is where we house some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from an anonymous attendee, do you have any clarity on the actual date of the environmental justice workshop listed as October 1 through 3rd?
We're working to nail that down, I think, by Friday. And do we have the tentative dates posted anywhere? No? Okay, we're working to have that nailed down by Friday. If you send us an email directly, I see that it's an anonymous. Go ahead and send us an email to our hazardous waste management plan email or to me, or and I can get back to you on that because it's something that we've been trying to nail down as well.
Maybe I'll put a commercial for the e-list here because then there's opportunities when those do get finalized. We'll send out emails as well before they are when they're set in their invitations. So if you're not on that, that's a good one as well. Yeah.
That the environmental justice one is one that we're coordinating with another group on, and we're working through schedules, and we should have an answer by Friday.
Okay. Also from an anonymous attendee, is DTSC considering that the limited landfill supply is directly impacted by the strenuous regulations and permitting process for Part B permits, specifically for landfills? Even when landfills are permitted, the extensive permit conditions cause disposal costs to go up for all generators, subsequently contributing to non-compliance by generators.
So great question. We do know that the complexities around particularly hazardous waste landfills, but landfills in general is a topic not just within California, but nationally. You could even outlining in their EPA's capacity assessment reports, some of the preamble and introductions talk about some of those complexities. Going back to CERCLA, why 104C9 requires states to have capacity is around the fact that if hazardous waste management capacity isn't available, then the only way to manage it ends up becoming illegal management. So there's a lot of complexities in some of that. So that's maybe how I can introduce it. I didn't necessarily go into the permitting requirements there, but
yeah, and I think the strenuous regulations are there because of the history.
Sure.
Yeah. And so they are being evaluated currently by permitting and us. We look at the regulations every day. And so I think the strenuous nature of them is due to the history and how waste was managed in the past, and evaluating them to identify areas where improvements could be made is, I think, reasonable to do as well. There are additional permitting requirements in California, and they're working through them now. Some have been implemented. SB 673 went in, and there have been some parts of that implemented, and a few other parts or requirements that are currently being worked on. The SB 673 team is open for questions, and I would recommend if you have questions about that, refer it to that team, as they are closest to the information available. And so I think I'll put stuff there.
Okay, we've got not a question from Todd Coy, but since 1988, we are permitted DSDF Part B facility for lead batteries in California. We are not a smelter. We also collect lithium EV batteries. The challenges we are now facing with the increase of fees and the long lead times to modify permits in order to be dynamic in business are forcing us to consider leaving California.
Thank you, Todd. It's not. No, thank you for that comment. We will take that feedback back. You want to add anything?
No, comment. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from an anonymous attendee, one of the topics that has been discussed is to allow non-RCRA soils to be managed under the alternative management standards. If a hazardous waste landfill is currently required to go through extensive permitting and usually has robust monitoring requirements, how are those same protections going to be assured for the communities around the landfills being considered under the alternative management standards?
A great question. And so first, there are alternative management standards for certain wastes already. Treated wood waste is one, and that's where we started. We wanted to get an understanding of how are these landfills constructed? How are they operated? there's documents that are available called joint technical documents that go through the construction and operation of these landfills. One of the findings was that they have liners and leachate collection systems, which was not the case 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So
when
over
RCRA was built.
Back when RCRA was formed. And so over time, it seems the non-hazardous waste landfills, the construction and operation has vastly improved. And there's a few different pieces of it. And so the protection's going to be assured. So that's getting to the part where how are the same protections going to be assured for the communities around the landfills being considered under alternative management standards. So it is there's multiple parts to ensuring that they are secure. So you have your construction and the design of the landfill, and you have your operational piece. You also have the underlying geology, depth to groundwater. There's multiple considerations that have been implemented and are in regulatory requirements. So the landfills that have been identified for treated wood waste, for example, have design requirements. They also have, they're also regulated by the Water Board and CalRecycle, as well as local air districts. Collectively, it is I've used the term in the last workshop. It's a whole of government approach to managing waste in general. Landfills are regulated under RCRA. RCRA Subtitle C is where hazardous waste landfills are regulated, and RCRA Subtitle D is where the non-hazardous waste landfills, so Class 2 and Class 3. So that whole of government approach provides protections for communities around the landfills, hazardous or non-hazardous.
Do you want to say, do you want a commercial for the workshops? Or?
Oh, yeah, we are having a workshop on landfills. It will be in November. We are also working to nail down that date.
Okay, from Chuck White. Will the plan evaluate specific waste streams for needed capacity, such as Li-ion batteries, lead acid batteries, voltaics?
Voltaics.
Okay, voltaics, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, one that that we talked about in our last workshop was lithium-ion batteries. Waste from renewable energy, photovoltaics. We haven't touched lead acid batteries.
No, it's just, yeah. We talk about it in terms of our planning and in terms of understanding capacity. Most of the actual data will be still based on a report, but we do we understand the rise of these waste streams that didn't have capacity back when a lot of these were cited. So.
Yeah, so Chuck, I would recommend watching the third workshop. We go through an evaluation of 3 different waste streams.
Now, Chuck White also have. Oh, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Okay, I just want to let you know that Chuck White also has his hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Chuck, so you can. I believe you might have a follow-up.
Great. Hi, Chuck.
Hi, this is Chuck. I really don't have any follow-up. I didn't realize we were going to do most of it on the question and answer portal. So my questions are being answered by you folks as I've submitted them. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Chuck.
Okay, so we have Another, actually, this is a comment from Christina Graulau. There is no requirement for the generator to quote unquote update the volume with RCRA info. This needs to be mandated by EPA and to only use Weighmaster certificate volumes.
Christina, thank you for the comment, Christina. I need to go and check a reg and to get the citation. It's escaping me right now, but there is a requirement that if there is a manifest error, that it is corrected. And I believe if there is a 10% difference from what the actual weight is to what's on the manifest, it's required to be corrected. And that is managed between the receiving facility and the generator. Let me try and dig up the citation for you, and I can, if I can't find it in the next few minutes, I can send it to you offline.
Christina Graulau also has a couple comments here and a question. Good to know you did some data adjustments. I did not pick that up from reading the report. Another comment is discrepancy reports are not triggered when the volume is converted by the receiving facility. Now, Christina also has a question. Are you going to read aloud the question submitted in advance of this webinar? I submitted a question and have not heard it.
Yeah, I can do that. I forgot about that. I actually have it loaded up.
Yeah. I'll filibuster while Ryan loads that. But no, thank you for adding that into the pre-survey, and for all the future workshops. Those are very helpful. It does allow us to be ready for these types of questions in advance, or if we need to do additional research, it does promote or allow us to do that as well. So
yeah,
hopefully that filibustered for Ryan, but thank you for submitting. I know we did get a number of them, so thank you.
We got primarily two questions. The others were more comment, just looking forward to learning. And so Christine's question from the pre-workshop survey, will DTSC include or exclude certain data to avoid double counting? Differentiation between the data already reported to CalRecycle, i.e. used oil, used tires, e-waste, scrap metal, and data DTSC is now seeking under EVQ, the EVQ program. There is overlap with used oil and e-waste in these programs. There is also overlap, specifically the appliance recycling, due to materials requiring special handling, including refrigerants, capacitors, parts with PCBs and or DEHPs.
Yeah, maybe I can take the first crack at it. Mm-hmm. We do absolutely consider double counting. We do it in a variety of different aspects. Going back to our Appendix B, we also outline how we try to ensure there's no double counting when it comes to hazardous waste manifests, because of manifests can track tonnage from its generator to a consolidator, and then a consolidator to the final destination, or multiple consolidators. We do a fair amount of work to try to ensure that that doesn't get double counted as well. Going to some of the stuff that's submitted with CalRecycle and EVQ, we have been monitoring a number of those as well, with the understanding that there could be definitely double counting. The new EVQ data is still ongoing and is new. Not all hazardous waste generators have submitted yet, just based on the rolling nature of those submittals, plus I believe it's 60 days to be able to, from their receipt of request to submit that. I believe it's 60 days. So we do understand that there is overlap, but that's not necessarily as much something that we think will be double counted, but actually how it's represented. Some of the EVQ changes were around fees, and we do know that it would be counting maybe used oil that is exempt from fees that may be tracked with CalRecycle. So we do understand that there is some nature there, and we are very cognitive and do a lot of work to make sure it's not double counted.
Yeah. I'll tag on, Christina, in section, I think it's in section 3, where we talk about universal waste.
Yeah.
And how we organize that data to try and avoid double counting of those It has to do with how a facility is, I guess, categorized, and how we had to split it apart. So there's a discussion in that section about how we try to organize that information to avoid double counting. I did want to double check that you were asking about double counting for like our use and how we quantify this, or was the question more about like double reporting, I guess, or having to report to multiple sources? I
distinction.
Wanted to check out that we were understanding the question correct.
Also from Christina Growlow. Also, Christina, if you want to go ahead and send us a message in the chat to double counting, not double reporting.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
So, yeah.
Good point of clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another comment from Christina Growlow. A conversation from cubic yards to tons occurs within RCRA info, then again within HWTS. Discrepancy of volumes because of conversion factors is very different than if a drum/container is missing a quantity.
That's interesting. Well, we can take that back and talk about that.
Yeah, this is a very detailed discussion like that, where certain waste streams may be labeled as soil versus asbestos, but it might be hazardous because of asbestos. So there are a lot of complexities in tracking that. We do our best to focus down on it. So yeah, waste streams are very complex. Not to undersell that.
Yeah.
And it appears as though we've answered all questions. There's no open questions or comments.
Okay. No, that's helpful. Thank you everyone for your comments, questions, or feedback. We will we'll open it back up just in case. So if you think of one more or two more, we'll still be around at the end. So we'll go back over some just closing out slides, and then we'll open it back up.
Yeah, and just real quick before Shawn goes, there is a post-workshop survey.
Thank you.
Please fill it out. It's very helpful for us. We use it to help develop workshops and assess if we're providing the information in a manner that works, that is being well received, that's understood, and then you can give us questions or comments in that or feedback. We do take those back. Mm-hmm. Consider the information that's included in those.
Absolutely. So again, thank you everyone. Go ahead, next slide. So we very much appreciate everyone's feedback today. Again, we'll open it back up for any final comments in a few moments. But as a reminder, we do have additional workshops coming in the next few months. So go ahead and next slide. Again, here's our current tentative schedule. I would love to be able to have more additional comments or any questions here. They're very, very detailed conversations, kind of like how we had today. Again,
I was just going to touch on this real quick. We're going to try and firm up these dates here soon for everybody. I know it's been floating out there, and it's been an earworm for me to try and to get settled. We're, like I said in the beginning, that we're coordinating with some other groups for a number of these, and sometimes that it just takes a bit of an effort to lock down a date, and so we are working towards that. So one of my short-term goals to get that settled. I know it can be unclear because y'all have to plan for the future dates as well, get our schedules organized. So we understand that, working towards it. Thanks for the patience.
Awesome. And as a reminder, feel free to join our e-list if you haven't yet. You'll be able to receive those invitations once those dates are set and as they approach. So don't forget to join there. You can find our e-list and other information. Go ahead, next slide. both here and on our website. So if you're want to use the QR code on the left, they'll help jump you right to our website. Join our e-list, or feel free after today or in our next workshops, if you have any additional comments or want to contact us, right there on the bottom is our email address. And yeah, I think we can, next slide, we can open up to additional comments. I also do want to thank our interpretation today. It's one that we've been working with them for a while, and they've been great for us. Yeah, so wanted to put that little shout out there as well. So yeah, if there's any additional comments, feedback, questions, we're here to try to do our best. Otherwise, feel free to send them out either by our website or email.
Looks like we don't have any questions or comments coming through the Q&A.
Yep. Wonderful. Okay. Great. Well, thank you again. I'll let Ryan close out as well, but I do appreciate you guys joining today and having hopefully a detailed and informative discussion. So
yeah,
thank you.
Well, I think we're good. Onwards and upwards.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Alejandro, for facilitating today.
Always my pleasure. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.